When U.S. President Barack Obama visited Beijing last November, he and Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a joint landmark agreement to fight the effects of climate change. It committed the two nations to reduce planet-warming carbon emissions. It also cemented a first-ever pledge by China to stop its emissions from growing by 2030. The accord is widely seen as a crucial first step toward prompting other nations to make their own dramatic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. This is a new global agreement on curbing climate change, is expected to be signed this fall by every nation around the globe at a United Nations summit in Paris. As a stepping stone to meeting these carbon-cutting goals, U.S. and Chinese climate change negotiators met in Los Angeles last week. They announced joint actions by cities, states, and provinces in both countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Attending the summit was Oscar-winning director James Cameron, a Hollywood powerhouse whose iconic blockbuster films Titanic and Avatar set global box office records. Cameron led a roundtable discussion on sustainability in the food chain and the impact our diets have on climate change. I sat down with James Cameron at the U.S.-China Climate Leaders Summit last week. He shared his feelings about the importance of the deal between the world's #1 and #2 carbon polluters in curbing global climate change once and for all. Let me start with China and the U.S. back in 2014, pledging to curb emissions. Somebody who's committed so much of your time to this effort. What was your reaction?
Jubilant. You know, it's such an important dialogue to begin and such an important step. And for the two leading economies of the world, the two strongest nations, the two biggest consumers in the world, the two biggest polluters of carbon emitters in the world, to pledge this to each other is such a leadership role that they've taken on. And certainly there are a lot of other countries that have plunged in first, but they're smaller countries. Now for the two big ones to accept responsibility and take on that leadership role, I think it's huge.
China's commitment. I was in China a couple of years ago. I mean, we know what a vast, huge country this is, and the drain on resources in terms of energy. Their commitment. Talk to me about the significance of that, because it is quite a step to say by 2030 we're going to do this.
Yeah, well, I think China can move fast, and that's what we've seen. They've moved very fast in industrializing. They move very fast in growing their economy. 8% GDP a year, just year over year. So, and we've seen that they can make sweeping changes, and people get on board. So solar, when they said we're doing solar, all of a sudden they're putting in solar at a rate that dwarfs what everyone else is doing. I think in 2013 alone, they installed more solar than everything that's been installed in North America since solar was invented in 1 year. So yes, the problems have come up very fast because China has industrialized so quickly, but they also have the capability to move quickly to quell it. Now, can they get off coal overnight? No, of course not, but you've got to start somewhere, and they're putting in wind at an unprecedented rate, they're putting in solar at an unprecedented rate, and so, that looks hopeful.
I saw your TED Talk where you talked about spending 3,000 hours underwater,
yeah, at least.
And also about leadership, what you learned about leadership. Here are these two incredibly large countries which have so much influence. In terms of leadership, what does this do in terms of sending a message to other countries, do you think?
I think leadership, whether it's at the personal level or a small team or at a national level, should follow the same basic pattern, which is that you lead by example. And we haven't been doing that. We in America haven't been doing that. We're the tech leader, and we love to export our vision of democracy and all that sort of thing, but we haven't been exporting our vision of sustainability because we haven't been walking the walk ourselves here. And I say, America, I've lived here for 44 years. I'm still a Canadian citizen, but Canada's really in the same boat. So we have to lead by example. We have to set an example. Germany has been ahead of us. Denmark has been ahead of us in wind and solar and in a whole consciousness around sustainability. And I think, frankly, it's way overdue that we step up and take responsibility. But I think it's been, well, there's no point us doing it if China doesn't do it. And I think China's been sitting back and saying, wait a minute, you guys have had the benefit of a 100-year head start industrializing. Let us catch up. And so everybody's had their reasons for stepping away from responsibility, and that just changed.
The catching up question. We've got a lot of countries that are exploding. They all want that.
Yeah.
How do you get that message across to them that, look, this is not a good thing?
Well, I think it has to be people taking individual responsibility. We can't compete like teams. Yes, Europe and America has been ahead in the industrialization game and reaped the rewards of a more profligate lifestyle. That's really what we've accomplished. We have a lifestyle that takes in so much more energy and has such a heavy footprint on the earth. We can't do it anymore, and other people shouldn't aspire to it. So it's not a competition. Let us catch up to where you are, and then we'll all turn around and take a step back. It's not going to work. If everybody in the world wants to live like people are currently living in America, we need 4 Earths or 5 Earths. It doesn't pencil out. The math just isn't there. So we're at a point in human evolution, the evolution of our civilization, where we just have to have a different attitude about how much an individual needs, what we take, versus what we give back. You know, I call it the fundamental conflict between the takers and the caretakers. And we just have to be more caretakers. And that applies to everybody.
What will the message be once you go downstairs? You're kind enough to talk to us right now, but obviously that's got to be in the back of your mind right now.
Sure.
The wheels are spinning. What's going to be your message?
Look, I think there are a lot of people out there, you know, telling us that climate change exists, what the impacts are going to be, working in renewable energy and all the things that need to be done, working in transportation. My focus is a niche focus. When I go downstairs, I'm going to be talking about food. People think, what's food got to do with climate? Well, this is the big elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. When people think of how we mitigate climate change, they initially think of, you know, coal-fired power plants and tailpipe emissions. Okay, you're good. There's a missing middle, because greater than the entire transportation sector of the entire world is animal agriculture. So here's a place where we can make a huge personal difference, you, me, everybody out there. We don't have to wait to build wind farms. We don't have to wait to build solar plants. We can just change what we eat. Just eat less meat and dairy, and your carbon footprint drops way down. So I eat 100% plant-based. I'm not asking people to do that, but since I do, my water footprint is about half of, let's say, somebody who eats a standard American diet. My carbon footprint is about a third, and so I feel not only is it making me healthier, but I feel I'm contributing to a healthier planet, and I've made that decision irrespective of what legislators do. And we can't wait for them. We need to take action ourselves.
I saw an interview where somebody associated with Avatar said that before you started shooting, that you took the cast over to Hawaii and you actually saw clear cutting in it, kind of this epiphany.
Right.
I want to talk to you about your epiphanies. You know, what was it that created your epiphany about climate, and then about this linkage, you know, food and climate?
I've always been very conscious of our impact on the environment. You know, I'm a child of the 60s. So you had the big oil spill in Santa Barbara that was on the cover of Time magazine in 1969. And even though I was living in Canada at the time, I became very aware. So I've followed this for a long time. The big epiphany for me around the food-climate connection was about 3.5 years ago, because I had known how heavy the footprint of animal agriculture is and how devastating it is. It's the greatest source of biodiversity loss. It's the greatest polluter of water. Et cetera, et cetera. You go on down the list. It's horrific. But I thought, well, bummer, because I need to have my animal protein. You know, that's just the way human beings are wired. 3.5 years ago, I found out that not only is that not true, it's actually the opposite. It's actually harmful to your body, and it contributes a lot to the kinds of diseases that we have, and so-called diseases of affluence, like heart disease and diabetes and osteoporosis and things like that, and a number of cancers. So I thought, wow, this is a win-win. I just cut out all the meat and dairy. I'm doing my thing for the environment, and I'm doing my thing for myself and my own longevity. And as a father, I need to be around to protect my family, you know. So it just all added up. It was like, wow, where's the bad news in this story? There isn't any.
Let me ask you about Food Choice Task Force. Yeah. What is it? How'd you get involved with that?
Food Choice Task Force is jointly funded by my Avatar Alliance Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and Craig McCaw, you know, the cell phone, you know, comms mogul, friend of mine, and we're both vegan. And so we thought, all right, let's figure out a way to get the word out there. So the Food Choice Task Force is a small group of committed people who are hoping to get some media presence out there about these issues, because there isn't much. There's no sort of film you can go to. There are only a handful of books. There's not much out there, but the facts are so compelling.
My Plate, My Planet.
My Plate, My Planet is an initiative of the Food Choice Task Force that we did around, recently here in the US, we had the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, right? So that's a bunch of scientists that the government gets together to tell the USDA and the Human Health and Services Group what they should be doing about food guidelines. And they do it every 5 years. And so this year they did something very unprecedented. These scientists came back and said, we need to put sustainability language into the guidelines. We need to understand this connection between our food choices and the environment and climate change. They made that link for the first time. And they also said, eat less plants, eat more plants and less meat and dairy for the first time. So we thought, all right, we need to roll in behind this. So we did a big publicity campaign around these guidelines. And we actually took, normally there's a comment period. Normally they get about 5,000 public comments. As a result of the My Plate, My Planet campaign, they got something like 35,000 public comments.
Jeez.
So now they have to actually listen to us.
Wow.
Us being the grassroots, because the leadership doesn't do anything without the grassroots being there first.
You talked about grassroots, and it's interesting you bring that up because I watched Avatar this weekend. I hadn't seen it for a while. Mm-hmm. And there's a line, Jake has this speech, and he says, we need to send a message to the sky people. They cannot take what they want. This is our land. Right. That seemed like a clarion call to your audience. Like, look, you guys can look to leaders to change the world, but you've got a responsibility as well.
Yeah.
35,000 comments says that they're kind of getting the message.
Exactly. That's really interesting that you perceived it that way, because it was written from an indigenous perspective. Like, this is our land, we were here first, you can't come and take it. But your spin on it, I think, is actually really empowering to the average person, which is, this is all our land collectively. Even planet Earth is all our land collectively. And if you think of the leadership, the governments of the world, they have to be responsive to our health and our needs and the future of our kids. And I think leaders are only starting to wake up about this because people are demanding it.
Well, to continue on, the other thing that struck me about the film, and I guess looking at it from a distance now, at the end, Jake's eyes open.
Yeah.
And another message to the audience,
right.
like, open your eyes.
That's right. It's about seeing. The movie is all about seeing, about changing our perceptions. Jake comes in as a typical kind of Western civilized guy with a kind of militaristic perspective, and he's there to conquer. And he opens up and he has his own connection to nature. He begins to see nature the way the indigenous people do, and he ultimately winds up defending it. Well, that's the journey we all need to be on. We all need to become warriors for the natural world. Regardless of how much you like polar bears and that sort of thing, we have to do it for ourselves, because we have to have an organic living world that works together, and the only way to do that is to play by nature's rules.
But it isn't preachy.
No,
you have to really kind of strike a balance, don't you?
You do. You can't preach. I think what Avatar tried to do was not say, okay, here are the horrors, this is climate change, all those sorts of things. It said, this is the beautiful thing that we tend to become disconnected from, nature and its harmony and its balance. And it reminds people of that feeling you had when you walked in the woods as a kid, and we all have it. And then we move to cities, and we get into an urban, very digital lifestyle, and we just wake up one day and say, I miss that, And I think, I'm not saying everybody needs to move to the country. Take a walk in a park, go to a sequoia forest, whatever it is, but you can't protect what you don't respect and love.
I want to ask you about U.S.-China, unrelated to climate. Your climate, which is Hollywood. There's this DreamWorks partnership that's just come out. How do you see the relationship between the U.S. and China as far as films? Where is that going in the future, do you think?
Well, I think everybody's leaning forward from both sides in a really positive way. Hollywood has woken up over the last few years, and my first forays into China from a business perspective were just kind of at that moment where everybody was starting to wake up and say, wow, this is an enormous market. If you look at, Avatar was the highest grossing film in history in China. I think it's since been supplanted, but not by very much. And that was at a point when there were probably a third of the number of 3D theaters that are in China now, just a few years later, 5 years later. So I think everybody has pretty much agreed on the fact that it's going to be the biggest cinema market probably by 2018. But it's all a fairly new relationship. We're still in the romance period. you know, and there are issues with getting films from the U.S. played there. I think the studios are starting to look beyond just competing with each other to get their films into the China market, and they're thinking, how can we form long-term business relationships with Chinese producers, Chinese funds, and so on, so that we can help China make not only better films for its own internal market, but films for a global marketplace in the same way that, you know, America makes films for a global marketplace. Not because everybody wants to see American films, it's because all the filmmakers from all over the world come to Hollywood. Hollywood is just a state of mind. It's not really a place. It's just a gathering place for filmmakers from everywhere. I'm Canadian, for example. You know, so the question is, can we get China to that level?
James Cameron, thanks so much for your time.
Great interview. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
We'll be right back with this week's Full Frame Close-Up.